Welcome to another episode of Discover Marshalltown. Kyle Martin, and we are at Riverside Cemetery today. We have General Manager Dorie Tammen. Thank you for being our guest today.
You're welcome.
And first of all, we're going to find out a little bit about Dorie and where'd you grow up?
I was born and raised in Marshalltown. Graduated high school here in 1974. Went off to school and left town for many years, worked in healthcare, and about 5 years ago came back to town.
Was this job what brought you back to town?
No, it was another job.
Completely something to, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing as a young schoolgirl, this probably was not a job that you thought, wow, that's,
No.
somewhere I'm going to end up.
But I never thought I'd end up in a nursing home working either, which is what I did for 30 years.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very good. So 5 years here as general manager.
3 years.
3 years.
Came back, did something else for 2 years, and then came here.
Okay. Riverside Cemetery is got a very storied history, no doubt about it. Maybe if you could, maybe give us a little background on the cemetery itself. Is this the oldest cemetery in town?
Yes. I mean, there may be rural cemeteries.
Pioneer cemeteries.
Yeah. We opened here in 1863 during the Civil War with some land that was purchased from Reuben and Catherine Webster of Webster Street and Byron Street. Byron was their son.
Hold on, Dorie. You guys got to be quiet. We're trying to do a show here. Okay, you were talking about...
Do you think they'll listen?
You were talking about the Websters. Go ahead, Dorie. I'm sorry.
So, Reuben and Catherine Webster had a son, Byron, and we believe Webster Street and Byron Street are named after them as well. And they sold us a second plot of land after Reuben passed away, was purchased from his wife. We actually have an old handwritten land description of the first plot, and it uses a measure called a chain. And I at one time knew how far that was.
Sure.
But they measure and describe the legal description of the land based on a corner of the Woodbury building to a 14-inch elm tree to a 12-inch oak tree or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, those were the landmarks they used to describe the legal area of the cemetery. Dorie,
it's like an Alfred Hitchcock movie behind us.
The birds.
And we'll talk about the geese here in a minute because they are a major attraction here at Riverside Cemetery. We were just talking about the measurements. During the Civil War, I mean, obviously soldiers were coming home. A lot of folks obviously had to bury Civil War veterans almost immediately or closely after the war. When was the first plot here? Do you know? Oh, pretty close, right around there.
It opened in April of 1863, and I don't think there were a lot of immediate Civil War burials because usually those killed in the war were buried where they died.
Right, like at Shiloh and Gettysburg.
We have 2 plots that are specifically for Civil War veterans, but most of them died in the 1880s, 90s, at the turn of the century.
They lived a little.
Right, and then there are other Civil War veterans scattered through in their own family plots as well.
Sure. A lot of famous families in town, and this. I'm guessing this was the place that families decided to buy different burial plots. Would you mind naming some of the famous families?
Well, of course, the Ansons have a plot here. Kirby's have a mausoleum over there, and in that mausoleum are also Mr. and Mrs. Henry Howe, who were good friends of the Kirbys, and Mr. Kirby and Mr. Howe were business partners, and the 2 wives became really good friends. Neither couple ever had children. They built homes right next to each other on East Main Street and 5th Avenue, where Eye Care Associates is today.
Right.
And the 2 ladies were instrumental in starting up the 20th Century Club, which still exists today.
Right.
Anna Howe was instrumental in getting the first library in Marshalltown, which was then at the courthouse, interestingly enough. And since neither one had children, they were all 4 buried in that mausoleum.
Well, you don't hear about that every day.
No, and the Howe's house is still there. It's that apartment house, big brown apartment house on the south side of Eye Care Associates.
Okay,
on Fifth.
okay, sure. Yeah, you don't hear about neighbors.
Isn't that fascinating?
Neighbors being buried with neighbors.
I know.
It's very unique. The grounds out here are absolutely spectacular. The trees alone. I mean, I know you've had some damage over the years because of these wonderful old trees. You know, good strong wind, and we've had some of that lately, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm seeing a dead limb right there too.
Yeah, but I mean, it's absolutely beautiful out
It
here,
is.
and the ponds are these man-made? Do you know of?
It was a marshy area originally, and they didn't feel it was suitable for burials. So Sam Ruby, who was the first Maine superintendent here, and he was a landscape architect. He ran the cemetery from the early 1890s to the 1940s when he passed away. Because he was a landscape architect, he completely revamped the whole idea of cemetery design, and this cemetery was known as one of the 10 most beautiful cemeteries in the country.
Wow.
He didn't do things in straight lines like most cemeteries are. It goes with the contours of the land. He wanted it to look natural. It makes it very beautiful and very charming. It also makes it more difficult to find graves and find plots and things like that.
Right.
But I wouldn't change it for anything.
And you brought this up, so we might as well touch on it. The records, when your genealogy is obviously very big right now. Mm-hmm. It's become very, very popular in recent years. Finding your roots and Ancestry.com. You have good records, I take it, and I know you're digitizing so many things out here. You want to talk about that a little bit?
The records from 1863 when it opened until 1883 are pretty minimal. We don't really have the names in kind of any chronological order. There's supposed to be a burial registry number 1. We've never been able to find it. So in 1883, they reorganized the cemetery, and I think that might have been when it became a perpetual care cemetery, which I should explain because a lot of people don't know what that is.
What is that?
That basically means that when you buy space here, whether it's in the ground or in the mausoleum or the columbariums for cremations, 20% of what you pay for that space goes into a perpetual care trust fund, and we can never use the balance of that fund, only the interest off of it. There's over $1 million in there, but we can't use it, only the interest. And that's intended so that when all the spaces are sold and all the burials are done and there's no more money coming in, that there's a fund of money there to do snow removal and mowing and take care of the cemetery.
Well, there's a lot of acreage here. I'm guessing, you're not going to run out of space anytime soon.
No, we have a lot of spaces left yet. In the older sections, you might have to hunt a little, especially if you want more than one space.
Right.
But we have newer sections that still have, right there. There are still plenty of spaces there. And in the other, over here west of the lake, and the Garden of the Cross over there, the newer sections, there are lots of spaces there left there.
Well, we were talking about digitizing records. And I know that you are constantly going through records and making them readily available for people who want to do some genealogy work, right? Yeah.
We have 14 burial order books dating back to the reorganization in 1883, and from that point on, and the burials are numbered in order of chronological. And the first one that we have recorded in those burial books in 1883 is number 1309, and it's Fanny Hodges, a little 8-month-old girl who died of cholera. And about 3 pages down is the burial order for an adult male, unknown. He had no identification on him. They had a coroner's inquest. He died of a pistol shot through the head.
Oh, no.
And I see that, and I'm going, oh, my God, this is like straight out of the Old West.
Yeah, right.
And we found a newspaper, the library helped us find a newspaper article, and it was covered in the newspaper, and they determined he had been murdered. I think that he was, we think that he may have been murdered on a railroad train and thrown off because he was found near the train tracks.
Oh my
So he's buried in an unmarked grave. His family never knew what happened to him. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think about that line. I've said this before, that line in Dances with Wolves.
Right.
Somebody back east is saying, why don't he write?
Yeah. That's probably
His
true.
poor family never knew what happened to him.
Oh.
I think it's tragic, too. I mean, you got to find some humor.
Right.
Because there's a lot of sadness here, too.
Do you have a You said unmarked graves. Did they used to call those Potter's Fields?
We don't have a potter's field here.
Okay.
They're just unmarked graves because
Right.
nobody bothered or they couldn't afford to
Right.
to pay for it. There were people buried here who didn't even have funds to pay for the burial, and there was an overseer of the poor named O.B. Barrows who handled all the burials for people who couldn't afford it and for unknown burials.
Right.
He's buried here himself.
Okay.
Which is pretty cool.
Which is ironic a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, we've had some throughout history. We've had, and maybe you've discovered some of this in your records. We've had major measles outbreaks. We've had, the Spanish flu.
Don't get me started on Spanish flu. It's my favorite subject. Having come from healthcare, I've always been intrigued by that.
If I remember my history correctly, it was really prevalent during the First World War, right around
1918.
Yeah, a lot of barracks. You would hear about whole barracks of soldiers that got the Spanish flu. Are you finding a lot of stuff like that disease? I sound very morbid right now, but are you finding in your records that there are, that there are folks here, sections of people that passed away from, like you said, cholera and measles?
Whooping cough and malarial fever and there's
stuff
dysentery.
Yeah, stuff that's not that common now.
Right. And the Spanish flu I've really looked at closely because I'm really interested in that. I read a really good book about the Spanish influenza, and so many of the stories of the people here tied in really well with the stories in that book. It was amazing. I mean, we have one soldier who died on a troop transport ship and sending troops over to fight in the war in Europe, and the president at the time was so set and determined on getting men over there, they were moving people from camp to camp, and it just increased the spread of the disease.
Right.
And those troop transport ships became floating caskets, was the way they described them in the book I read. And one of our victims here died on a troop transport ship on his way there.
Amazing.
And then we have a married couple who died out of state of influenza but came back here. They both died on the same day, left a small child behind, and were buried here. There was one fellow who moved to Marshalltown with his wife and two small boys, I believe, to work for Lennox, and he became delirious with it. And the old YMCA on Church Street, south of the courthouse, became during the epidemic became a Red Cross hospital specifically for flu victims because they wanted them isolated away from the regular, population in the hospitals. And this man was so delirious he jumped out of an upper floor window and fell to his death.
It is amazing that you don't hear that much about that anymore unless people are talking about World War I, but it was extremely prevalent and a lot of people died.
It's horrendous that we don't learn more about it in school. And the other interesting thing I learned was that the president never said the word Spanish influenza in public through that whole epidemic.
Really? Wow. Dorie Tammen is our guest, and we're out at Riverside Cemetery. We've got a little more time here before we go to break. One thing that's really interesting that you guys have done out here is you've done these cemetery tours. Here we are talking about history. The Kibbe Mausoleum was supposed to be featured in the one, but it got rained out.
Kibbe Mausoleum, yeah.
Yeah, it got rained out. What did I
Kibbe building you're
Kirby.
Thinking of.
Yeah, I am. Kibbe Mausoleum was supposed to be featured in that.
We have opened it up in previous history
Have
walks
you?
so people can see it.
Okay.
Mrs. Kibbe inherited all the wealth and was supposedly the wealthiest woman in Marshalltown after her husband died because of that.
Those are very, very popular from what I understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
These tours that you give. They're walking historical tours.
They're informal. We just walk through the grounds. I usually try and pick a sort of concentrated area and tell the stories of some of the people that are buried there.
I think it's
fun.
I think that is so neat that you get to hear about some pretty well-known residents, former residents.
Well, my favorite stories are the unknown ones because they're people nobody knew, but they had really interesting lives and really tragic stories, some of them, and amazing.
Yeah, we're going to take a break here. We're going to be back at Riverside Cemetery with Dorie Tammen right after this.
At Your Service is a program dedicated to public service employees of Marshalltown and Marshall County, Iowa. You can see At Your Service on McTV on Sundays at 5 and Thursdays at 7 p.m. This is Captain Mike Hankin with the Marshalltown Police Department, and on behalf of all of us in public service, thanks for watching.
Hi, my name is Mike Stegman, Director of the Marshall County Conservation Board and host of It's Our Nature on McTV. I invite you to join us as we explore the natural resources, conservation, and environmental education right here in Marshall County. We'll visit some of the public county parks and wildlife areas for you to enjoy and join in on hands-on activities like construction of birdhouses and special events like Prairie Heritage Days held every September. We'll also investigate some of the wildlife that inhabits Marshall County throughout the year. So join us for It's Our Nature on McTV, Wednesdays at 7 p.m., Sundays at 6.
Welcome back to Discover Marshalltown. Kyle Martin out at Riverside Cemetery. I love it when we can get outside. Dorie Tammen is general manager of Riverside. And Dorie, as far as religions are concerned, I know a lot of cemeteries are actually separated by religious beliefs. I see that, I see the Star of David over here. I see a Jewish memorial. Are they separated at all by what they believe in?
Somewhat. That is the Sons of Israel section, so that is a Jewish section there. We have 4 separate Catholic sections, 2 of which, over here, Catholic 1 and Catholic 2, were originally St. Mary's Cemetery, entirely separate from Riverside, and were owned and operated by St. Mary's Church, and when they needed to do a burial, they just sent the instructions here to open a grave for whoever it was. And then I think it was about in the early 1980s maybe that they gave that up and turned it over to Riverside entirely.
Interesting. Okay.
And that's really the only religious sections that we
other than that, there's no rhyme nor reason as to...
No.
Do people come in quite often if they don't have a family plot here? Can they request, provided there's room, can they request to be buried in a certain area?
Oh yeah, people pick
all the time.
Yeah,
I'm not.
We don't pick the spaces for them. They can go wherever they want.
Yeah.
So sometimes if they don't really know, I'll just say drive around and see what area you like and what where you think the view is nice or whatever.
Right.
And we'll look for a space there.
Okay. I'd be remiss if we did not talk about the geese. Because they were just having a little battle royale behind us at the beginning of the broadcast. The geese here are somewhat, they're celebrities, right? They're kind of a major draw.
Yeah. And some of them are permanent residents, so they're the ones we have names for some of them and all that. The Canada geese less so, although some of them are permanent residents because they don't fly, they can't fly, and they stay here year round.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they tend to go around like in families, and they'll bicker like that between families, I think, is what they're doing.
Well, I just wondered because you have, I mean, it's a aviary out here. There are an awful lot of different kinds of birds. Mm-hmm. It's very, very interesting, and you're always looking for donations for food during the winter, especially, right?
Yeah.
What do they like? I heard you interviewed before. What is it? Dog food or cat food? What is it that
they'll eat both? We buy and try to keep cracked corn on hand, but in the wintertime in particular, I'll get dog food, and we even had cat food given to us, and they did eat that. I kind of like it because it floats on water rather than sinking, and the ducks can just scoop it up when as they want it.
Yeah.
And it's got, I think, more fat and protein and calories that they probably need more in the winter with the weather and stress for that reason. But they'll also eat some vegetables and fruits, lettuce and cabbage and things like that, and of course bread. I try to give them whole grain breads because it's a little healthier. But
you're worried about their waistline a little bit.
Well, not waistline so much as nutrition.
Understood. No. In your role as general manager out here, or I should say job, what does that entail? I mean, kind of give me a typical day for you.
Oh, that can vary so much.
Because you're not on
day
TV every day.
No. We have a grounds crew here that takes care of the mowing and the stick picking up, which is an endless job, and weed eating, which in the summer months is an endless job as well. Digging graves, we have a professional grave digger who comes in and digs the traditional graves, and our crew does the cremation graves because those are smaller. But office, accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, overseeing all of that. We do have an office assistant who does some of those accounting, bookkeeping tasks too. Selling markers, gravestones, selling spaces. We sell flowers here, artificial flowers for the graves. A little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Responding to requests for genealogy information and grave locations. We get people coming in looking for graves. We get people from out of state looking for information on their ancestors who were buried here. A little bit of everything.
Yeah. Tell me about the spooky. We're getting close to Halloween. There's a famous, and I have never been to. It's a chair. Is that right?
The death chair.
The death chair. I've seen it in books and on websites. I have never been to it, nor do I really want to. I'm somewhat superstitious, but tell me about the lore behind the death chair.
There used to be two of them. They were vandalized. One was destroyed and could not be put back together, so we only have one now. It's on a Carlson family plot, and my understanding is that the chair was made by the patriarch of the family, one of the original family members who came to Marshalltown, but I don't know that for a fact. And the story is, and I've heard variations, the story is if you sit on it at midnight on your birthday or sit on it at midnight on New Year's, that you'll die within, 24 hours, or you'll be dead before. There are, I think, a multitude of variations on the story. I have friends who claim they have sat on it in those times and they're still living.
And they're still okay.
I haven't sat in it myself because I'm pretty happy and I don't really want to take any chances.
Why tempt fate?
Exactly.
Then you'd have to blame whatever happened to you on the chair.
Yeah.
Understood. Do you get folks that come in here at all? I know it's gated, so you can't just get in here.
After
you
dark.
said midnight, but I mean,
maybe. Well, I think people.
You're not supposed to be.
People sneak in here sometimes, I think, and maybe years ago did.
Sure. But you're not supposed to come in here after a certain...
and we close the gates at dusk and open them up again in the morning when daylight hits. So.
I don't know what's going on, Dorie. Is it just because you're here?
No, maybe it's because you're here.
They know you. They know that you possibly have
that I have,
chow
yeah,
or
that
something,
I have food, yeah.
Something like that.
They know when I pull in the morning. They'll come up to the door looking for food because they know I feed them in the morning, yeah.
My goodness.
Sometimes the white geese will walk right up to the door and peek in the window. Where's my food?
Where's Dorie with
and
my
I have
breakfast?
To tell my favorite story about Goosey Goose, the oldest male white domestic goose we have, because one time I was feeding him some bread and there were other geese behind me who wanted some too, so I turned around and started feeding them some of the bread, and Goosey Goose literally goosed me. There is a reason, right in the rear, there is a reason why that term came to be. It didn't hurt, but it was really pretty funny. He was saying, I want some more.
I want some. Is this, I should have asked this at the beginning. Is this a privately owned cemetery, or does the city own this?
Privately owned by the lot owners.
Yeah, I guess that's probably...
City has no involvement whatsoever.
Okay. As far as staff, you mentioned gravedigger, which I think would be a cool job to have on your business card. You could just show people, I'm a gravedigger.
Our gravedigger that we use, our professional gravedigger, is from out of town, and his business is called The Gravedigger.
The Gravedigger.
And he has T-shirts with it on and just truck and everything.
I love that.
He's been doing it for years. And
how many on staff do you have?
In the summertime, more. In the warmer months, more. Maybe 10, including us two in the office.
Right.
In the wintertime, usually just like one person full-time on the grounds to do the plowing and digging of any graves. Oh, and defrosting the ground when we have to dig a grave in the winter.
How do they do that? Is it like a warmer that they put on the ground?
It's a cover that goes over it. We used to use propane heaters under there, but if you had a really windy, you usually start it the day before and let it heat overnight, and the propane, if it's windy, sometimes would blow out.
Right.
So our grave digger got us into an entirely new practice, which uses less fuel and is greener, and it's using charcoal, bags of charcoal that you lay down on the ground and light, and you put the grave warmer over it, and by the next day it's defrosted enough to...
Really?
We have explosives
I don't need to know
permits
about...
in the office from the 1920s.
That's how they did it? They
I'm
blew up the
wondering if
ground?
they used dynamite to open the graves in the wintertime. I don't know what else we would have an explosives permits for.
That is crazy. That is absolute. Okay, we're in fall. I was gonna say we're coming up on fall. We are in fall. Do you just let the leaves? Because there are tons of trees out here, Dorie. Do they just stay put? The
No,
leaves.
we try to.
You try to.
We have a billy goat vac, and a great big tube that sucks them up, and we haul them in back along the river back there and dump them. And it's a huge job. I mean, it's imagine.
Yeah. As far as special,
and it also depends on how soon does it snow and how cold does it get, and
Right.
you know, whether we get them all picked up or most of them picked up or not.
as far as decoration of graves for Veterans Day or for Independence Day, or if they are a veteran, the Grand Army of the Republic, or Civil War veterans, a lot of those are, it's almost a prerequisite that you put a little American flag on there. It seems like you have a lot of situations out here in special days where you would decorate a grave.
It's mostly families.
Is it?
We can't do a whole lot of that because of the time involved, but I have gone out like on Veterans Day. Memorial Day pretty much takes care of itself with families and all of that.
Right.
But on Veterans Day, I've gone out and decorated either graves or the cemetery itself with flags and things like that, just to recognize the day. But
Yeah, very good. We've had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's not often that I get to do a show with wildlife behind me, so they're quiet now. We're about out of time here for another Discover Marshalltown, and Dorie Tammen, General Manager at Riverside Cemetery, has been our guest today. Thank you.